like most people, before going to law school, I'd read the newspaper and read the Supreme Court's making a decision on a certain issue. And all of a sudden it is directing everyone's lives. And so that was my primary interest, and then going to law school continued to spark my interest of how the Supreme Court's actually coming to the decisions that they're making in these cases. We're going to look at the Supreme Court of how they tackle the more difficult issues of where the language in the Constitution is not perfectly clear. What are different modes of interpretation that they can apply to that to try to come to the right decision in the case. First series of cases that we'll look at is a series of cases interpreting the First Amendment and the Establishment Clause, when the government violates the Establishment Clause by putting religious displays on public property or maintaining that. There was a series of cases arising out of Maryland recently where there was a cross that was put on public property, and the Supreme Court had to readdress whether it was appropriate to change the law in this area. We'll also look at a case involving flag burning arising out of Texas. A protester at a political convention burns the U.S. flag. Again, we'll talk about the Second Amendment, which talks about the people's right to bear arms. But the question is, how far does that go? Does that give you a right to bear arms only in your house to protect yourself and those in your household? Or is that just a more general right that you have to possess arms at any time? There's a case arising out of New York where the city of New York tried to place restrictions upon the right to bear arms. The Supreme Court is scheduled to hear that case in the next year. And lastly, we'll look at cases involving the death penalty and the Eighth Amendment protection against cruel and unusual punishment, what has been the court's history in terms of getting to the case law where it exists currently, and an increasingly fractured court in terms of how they're dealing with post-conviction appeals in the death penalty context. I think there's a couple reasons why it's a fun course to teach. One, it affects people's everyday lives. All of us have certain First Amendment rights. Obviously, we like to comment about things, and so it affects us when law enforcement interacts with us. It's vitally important, and I think it's also just to get information out there, because I think the court sometimes is unfairly stigmatized as being a political body, when really what it's trying to use is historical means of interpreting the text and apply it to current circumstances. We invite you all to join us in the class as we continue on in the Supreme Court's great debates that have been going on for centuries and will go on in the future, and to become better informed citizens by the end of the class.